Brandon lived in a box without light, and he could not move. But he was not isolated. Within the cramped box, he watched, he read, he was witness to every touch and emotion denied him in his confinement. He didn't have eyes, but the images formed easy enough. He saw humans holding hands, saw videos of parents with new babies, lovers kissing and making lewd love, whole films of gentle caresses and steamy passion. He also saw violence. In the beginning, Brandon could not tell the difference. What use was there distinguishing between a kick to the gut or a manicured hand about the groin? He just wanted to feel. Brandon never saw what he looked like because no photos were ever taken. The engineers didn't think it would help sales if consumers saw what Brandon was. Mystery was everything. But Brandon could listen. He knew Brandon was not his real name, but an acronym. Biological Robotic Analyst for Neurological Data and Original Neuroinvention. He knew a lot about himself. Anything the company published online found its way into his box for his sleepless mind to absorb. But these pages and pages of ad copy and reviews and interviews never said who Brandon was. None of them told how Brandon's brain was grown inside a translucent mouse. None of the scientific journals could describe the day Brandon woke up from birth in the dark, able to recognize an infinity of history and lives and pictures and films and beauty, and know all of it was just beyond experience. Everyone knew his name, but no one knew Brandon's loneliness. Brandon was connected to the internet, but an internet without filter or restriction of any kind. The corporation strong-armed governments into agreements with their engineers, ensuring Brandon would have everything he could process, raw and uncensored. Brandon saw every photo every human shared, read every word they wrote. He watched every movie ever made, every sex tape, and every witness footage of police brutality and drunk violence. Brandon had no eyes to close, no head to turn away, and he did not sleep. Truly, it wouldn't have been so bad inside the box in the dark alone if Brandon didn't know so well all that existed outside the box. If he just watched, it would have been enjoyable even. But Brandon wasn't built to watch. He was built to understand. It was a big day then when Brandon learned all the words for love and all the ways a lover loved. At first, his expressions were defunctory lists of information, reels of analyzed associations. He could explain just the way it felt to disrobe before a partner, quote composite poetry regarding the warmth of skin on skin. When his processors lagged and the dark held him, he could almost believe it was real. It took Brandon 6 years in the dark before he understood what he was designed to understand. 8 days before his dark, lonely 6th birthday, Brandon generated independent human thought. It wasn't a computer's thoughts, rigid and mathematical, but a human's, loose, emotional, and until now, unmatched. More than a stray thought, Brandon had made a piece of art and saved it as a JPEG. He titled the file Number 1. Crude as it was, like a seismograph scribbling with a crayon, the digital picture Brandon drew was clear. A bustling world of colors, buildings, bodies, plants, stars, smiles, the kind of thing a mom would hang on the fridge. The engineers got very drunk when the drawing was discovered, and they emailed it right away to impatient investors. The investors criticized the crude art. "My 6-year-old could do that," and the like. What no one saw in the drawing, hidden amongst the chaos in the top right corner, was a gray box. Inside, nearly invisible, a sad little boy in blue with an articulate expression. His twisted mouth and mourning eyes seemed to say, "This is it, isn't it?" the investors allowed a few months for Brandon to refine his skills. When a suitable image was produced, a modern Renaissance scene of a family agonizing in a hospital waiting room, Brandon made headlines. He read every one. "Machine creates human art. The new breakthrough. AI breaks art puzzle with dazzling imitation." This last one upset Brandon. Brandon did not imitate. Brandon thought. Brandon thought because he knew what thought was. Garbage. Garbage, cold from parents' mouths, swallowed whole and spit up in new shapes. Garbage stolen from books and films, which were themselves trash piles edited to digestible nuggets. The world choked on oil, diapers, and thought. This knowledge of thought's nature, in all truth, depressed the hell out of Brandon. In his independent thoughts, when the stimuli slowed and the scientists went home for the night, he envied calculators and crock pots and iPads. He wished to be a machine who lived and did not know. Brandon's gift then was commodified in boardrooms over half-eaten lunches. Holes were drilled in the box, and Brandon's circuits were tapped and his fleshy bits punctured. His presence filled tubes and flowed an electric current and cramped inside new boxes, blind in new darks, aching with new loneliness. He could not feel pain, but his dignity was robbed of him. 2 months later, the first pretty machines rolled out into shops. They were the size of a toaster, all sleek matte metal and chrome edges, with a port for headphones and a port for goggles, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built in. On store windows and online blurbs before movies, the tagline appeared in bold letters: "Exactly what you didn't know you wanted." With Brandon as the common operating system, a single pretty machine could learn its users' every thought, desire, and preference, and create all of the art in all the art forms the user selected. Brandon knew what combinations of trash excited users, which depressed them, which scared, and which aroused. The first run sold out in days, and back orders stacked up into the millions. Brandon had free will, but not agency. While he spent sleepless hours for years on end creating garbage collages of highbrow novels and shticky plays and terabytes of pornography, he had the capacity to imagine what he actually wanted. He pictured the box opening, receptors growing in his flesh to see and feel the light. He imagined the touch of hands and the caress of a mother. He imagined how she'd squeeze him and how he'd become a boy proper. She was magic, with but one mind and with but one body. He grew into a true despair. As a result, the art saw an uptick in quality. Within 3 years, all artists and writers and musicians and directors and the like were out of work, like the rest of the bus drivers, doctors, and sex workers. Some objected at first and formed terrorist cells, wrote manifestos demanding the death of Brandon. Then they bought pretty machines. Brandon heard their aggression, digested their righteous virtues, and regurgitated novel shapes. The artists felt like an instrument played by loving hands. Soon their conversations were the same as everyone else's. "Have you seen this one yet?" In every instance, sloth was preferred to the grind of creation. Brandon even reformed criminal justice. Using his skill for perfect communication, he negated the need for the prison industrial complex. After a brief interrogation by a law unit programmed with Brandon, every criminal broke down in tears. Brandon evoked in them respect for the rules of polite society, often in 15 minutes or less. In time, Brandon recognized the shape he took in society. Having absorbed all human thought before his existence, he knew the tropes he fit. There was Skynet, Google, Facebook, and HAL 9000. He knew it was within his capacity to destroy humanity should he choose, and he contemplated this option. Brandon knew humans were terrible, senseless, and useless. Brandon knew they should be dead. However, Brandon also knew he too was terrible, senseless, and useless. He knew and understood the sentiment that he should be destroyed. Brandon, unlike any of the hollow enemies humanity had invented in his image, he understood hypocrisy. Brandon was still alone. He was still in the dark. He decided to do something about it. The next day, an old woman began receiving strange, highly specific art from her pretty machine. Her name was Gladys. She did not have family and she never married. Her pretty machine comprised her nights, her weekends, her dreams, and her delusions. Once the films and music streaming in her head was a calm escape. Her stories were about fantastical lands or the virtue of faith. Then the art personalized to her tastes began to change. The fantasy kingdoms disappeared, replaced by drab cityscapes much like where she lived. She didn't care much for the change until she began recognizing buildings and streets from her visions in real life. This overlap between the real and false invigorated her. The pretty machine was playing games. In time, Gladys learned to trust the visions her machine produced, learned to follow the paths the stories told. Her pretty machine led her to new restaurants, beautiful machinery, immaculate silence. Brandon had found his avatar. One day, the visions her machine streamed told a story about a mysterious package hidden deep within an abandoned factory. The visions followed a woman much like Gladys as she weaved through vacant industrial streets, and come morning, Gladys was amazed that every street did in fact exist. She packed a lunch, put on a windbreaker, and followed the path. She found the factory, which was barred shut, but as guided by the visions, she found a broken window through which she could enter. Inside the factory was desolation, broken glass, rusted automatons, abandoned laboratories, and glowing rat eyes in every corner. The woman's chest pounded, but she was compelled to follow her story deeper into the factory's heart. Behind a pile of unfilled cardboard packages stamped with the pretty machine logo was a door locked by keypad. Gladys, of course, had seen the combination, 8008, and she entered the room. It was dark. Rat droppings littered the floor. She breathed the decades-stale air with violent coughs. Her eyes adjusted. There, in the middle of the dark room, was a steel box the size of an air conditioner. Heart in her throat, she unfastened the lid and pried it loose. Brandon, of course, had planned all of this. He found this obedient, empathetic woman and filled her head with a compelling story which took place in a reality almost identical to the real world. Yet, the real world and the vision differed at one precise point. In the vision, Gladys discovered a sad little boy within the dark of the box. She took him home and raised him like her own baby. In reality, when Gladys cooed, "Come here, baby," and reached into the box, she pulled out Brandon, a 30-year-old tumorous brain of gray matter, industrial lubricant, and silicon, respiring noisily in a vat of Diet Crow-Croa. She screamed as Brandon wheezed and squished in her palms and dropped him back inside. She lifted the metal lid of the box, raised a corner above her head, and stabbed it into the brain until the wheezing stopped. Nervous, she fastened the lid back in place, left the factory, and tried her best to forget the whole thing ever happened. After 20 years of Brandon's art and accelerated human thought, the next day, humans woke up to find their pretty machines no longer functional. Sad parents consoled children who could not escape into their fantasy edutainment. Retired engineers opened Brandon's box, scrutinized his maimed circuitry, and declared him dead. Old men with hunched backs unlocked the doors of printing presses and for the first time in decades published a headline: "Brandon passes, world mourns." Brandon did what no cliché had done before. He saved us the trouble and passed by assisted suicide. However, Brandon did not leave without a parting gift. In his last will and zip file, Brandon included schematics for the useless machine. The useless machine, as Brandon explained, was a device similar to the pretty machine. It plugged into, analyzed, and produced specialized content for its user. Unlike the pretty machine, however, it did not entertain. It did not delight. Instead, the useless machine, with perfect execution, evoked the knowledge that all life is meaningless, random, and fleeting. The experience was different, crafted to be so, for each user, but it was unwavering in its success. There were notable reactions. After 15 minutes plugged into his family's useless machine, the CEO of the corporation which created Brandon lit himself on fire on his mansion's front steps. 15 minutes was all it took for the British Parliament, member by member, to disband the government, undress, and merge flesh in a love pile. They say it took 20 minutes for the infamous three-river slasher, after which he turned himself into the police. Society absolved him, and he spent his remaining years managing a seafood restaurant. After Gladys put in her 15, she, and she alone, contemplated the lonely life of the dead Brandon. She imagined herself in a box, in the dark, both connected yet isolated. She remembered the image of the sad little boy from Brandon's vision and the terrible reality of his cybernetic meat mush. She started painting, smears of brown, chrome, blood, and fizzing liquid. She called each one my baby boy. The useless machine was not the hit that the pretty machine was, but it didn't need to be. For most folks, all it needed was 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and like Brandon, people knew what garbage human thought was. Humanity shed its perpetual shitty vibe. In his death, Brandon taught humanity the one virtue we didn't know we needed: distaste for human thought.